Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. Last week we discussed market mapping and looked at the client side of it, and we had some incredible sort of feedback afterwards. Quite a few people sending testimonials through to us, which was really good. Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to carry on that theme of market mapping. When next week we're looking at bringing in Alec Bennison in, the MD and founder of Market Mapper itself, who's kindly sponsored this series, and he's going to be giving us a masterclass on how to use your tech and build and maintain and create a world-class market map, which will create significant ROI. So that's next week. But this week, there's Dave and I, and we're going to talk about candidate market mapping, building your talent pool of intelligence from the ground up. And this webinar is aimed to sort of teach recruitment agencies how to build comprehensive candidate market maps to establish and own their marketplace. So I hope you enjoy it. Feel free to ask any questions that you've got of us on the way through. Dave's instantly said to me, he said, "Oh my God, market mapping, what's this all about? What am I going to answer?" So I'm going to put Dave straight under pressure and ask him the first question. So Dave, here's the first question for you. What's the step-by-step process for building a first-class market map when you're starting with a messy, unstructured database, as quite a lot of recruitment agencies will be?
I was kind of laughing as I read through the questions because I thought, I'm back at A-levels and I haven't done all the revision, and I hope I'm in geography, not history. So, I think the thing is that most of the databases that we've got, we only use a small percentage of them. And a lot of times you've got companies that have merged together databases, or they've upgraded a database and they've tried to keep the relevant data and hope they've got rid of the data that isn't relevant. So for the most part, databases in recruitment tend to be fairly unstructured. Unless you're a relatively new company and you've started afresh and you've started to get the candidates you want, or you're in a type of search type of organization where you've got very few candidates because you've got to go and get them to make them. So the first process, if I was looking at deciding to market map, is deciding what roles do I want to map. What is it that I want to map? You've got to have that outside view of, you can't map everything. So what's your sweet spot? What's your sweet spot? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to market map as a geography? Are you trying to market map a role? Are you trying to market map for one specific client? But you've got to start somewhere. And the way I would start is looking at a role that your company tends to provide and say, right, I'm going to market map head teachers. I'm going to market map physiotherapists. I'm going to market map technology people with Python skills. So you've got to define the role and then kind of identify the service that you're going to provide in terms of, well, this is the role and it's this seniority, or it's a junior role or something like that. But just to get you started, to get into the weeds of that database, is looking at a role and thinking, right, this is where I'm going to get going.
It's interesting. As I said last week, the first thing that we should do is remove this from the sales team, because this is a process. So if you're going to initially sort of build a market map and you want it done properly, you don't want someone who's got the pressure of doing business development, filling roles, account management, and everything else that a salesperson does. So if you've got the luxury and you've got the opportunity, I'd remove it from there. So you want to either delegate it to someone or outsource it. And this is not trying to sell Alex's product of Market Mapper, but that's what I'd do. I'd look to outsource it from there. So the first thing, Dave, I think you've hit on a point there that I've sort of thought about as well, which the first thing I'd do is I'd look at the jobs that I regularly fill, and I'd look at those jobs that make me the most money. And then I'd search for every candidate that I have on my system that's been in those processes, and I would map those candidates, because that will give me an idea whether I've got enough candidates to carry on filling the roles that we can fill, but it will also tell me how many candidates that I've got on the jobs that make me the most money. Once I've got all of that information, and this is where the joy of how good your CRM really is, and most CRMs can do this, I would attach that candidate to the client. So we know there's a direct link between the candidate and the client. So we know whether they've applied for a role or whether they're now working at that company. So again, if I want to find them quickly, I can find those candidates really quickly. So it's coding the right candidate, it's attaching to the right company and doing the right things. Okay. If I put them forward to a role, then I'd map that. Okay. So then from a simple search, we'll be able to discover whether we've got enough candidates for the roles that we're trying to fill, or whether we've got enough candidates for the really high-end roles that we want to fill, because that means that when we can start to build a map, when a client comes to us, we know we've got product. So you could either use, whilst we're building that map, you can use your job boards, you can use the job board databases to try help that. You can use LinkedIn to help you do that and map those markets. But better still, I would use either tools to help me map that, or I'd use someone that's going to map that market information for me. And I've got one of my clients that we work with, the marketing department. She was very effervescent about how she didn't think the salespeople actually thought what she did was any use of any good, until I started to say, right, why don't you tell them exactly what placements came from your information, from marketing, and from what you've done from marketing. So she did. And she said, I now can't keep the people out of the room. But what we then led into was every time we brought a new person in, or we're trying to develop a market, she would then provide data from the database of the right candidates, all the candidates in the marketplace and all the clients in the marketplace, with email addresses and telephone numbers, and do that. So I think, that's the primary that we do. And I started this process with a client yesterday. And her comments were, clients come to me because they know I'll have somebody who's great for that job. But quite a few, when they come and say, I haven't quite got candidates. And I said, well, clients want product. So if you need product, you've got to build that product. So the more product that you have, then the higher fees that you can command, and the more clients will come to you because they know that you have that product. So start with the ones that you can fill straight away, do that, and then find the ones that are the most lucrative to you and start to fill that, because those are the two roles that I'd start to focus on. Look at all the roles that you don't fill, forget them, don't map those. So you're right, you can't map everything. It's almost a physical impossibility to map everything. So carrying on from that question then, how do you reverse engineer your candidate market map structure from your client map and target accounts to ensure that every talent pool you build has a commercial purpose?
And I think that's part of what you were saying earlier, Howard. It's about the lucrative nature of the candidates that you want to place. So a few weeks ago, we were talking about BD, and this is absolutely linking obviously to BD, looking at candidates that didn't quite make a job in the first place, but were on the shortlist, but somebody else got the job. Well, there you've got a pool of candidates that are almost good enough for that job, but they may be good enough for something else. What are you doing with them? Yeah, are they going to be lucrative for you in your sector in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months? Because then you're building up a pool of talent that has a really good chance of getting a job because they've become very close. And I've often found with the companies I work with, once they've made a placement, they're delighted they've made a placement, but they don't do a lot of work with the candidates that didn't quite make it or got to interview and took another job. So we know they're going to get a job, but they've taken something else. And there's a whole pile of candidates like that, that if we keep in contact with them, we can then go back to our clients and say, actually, we've got these people who are available now. And to your point about marketing, I accept that not every one of the agencies that may be listening on here have a marketing department, but it is a brilliant use of whoever occupies that role, if you do have, to get them to look at where the churn is. Yeah, look at the churn in the last 12 months at the most lucrative candidates, the most valuable candidates they've got, the ones with the highest margin, the highest salary, however you defend that, whatever works, and saying, actually, these are the ones that I want to show to my clients that I have access to.
So I'm going to take that to a sort of slightly different level. Okay. If you've already got the most filled roles and the most lucrative roles, and you know those candidates now, and you're starting to build those candidate pools, now look at the clients who take those type of candidates. So whether you're looking from a niche point of view or from a geographical point of view, if you suddenly find every employee that works for all of those clients and attach them to the client, okay, Now your CRM is starting to give you candidates that work there, candidates that would potentially could work there, candidates with the right skill set that can work there. So if you go that one stage further, if you start to create searchable fields in your CRM or searchable terms that you could place into part of the CRM that you can then find those candidates, then what you're starting to build is a candidate process that when a client comes to you or when a client candidate comes to you, you instantly have an answer for them of where they can be and where they can be placed. Now, yes, lots of people say they do that with their CRM, but when you actually test that, no, they don't, because they can't find those candidates and they only find another one. So you've got to start to code your candidates so you can find them properly, and you've got to start to use the technology in your CRM. And go back to your point from question one, we only use a very small part of our technology. Now, can you imagine if a client calls where you're discussing the marketplace, but now you're not simply talking about the market generically. Now you can see which client has a high attrition, as you said. You can now look at the ones that are recruiting. You now look at the ones where all the candidates that can fill those type of roles. You don't really need the job boards anymore. And what you need is you start to create an initial long list for each individual client, even before they give you a job. You've got long lists of candidates that can do that. And that should be all in your CRM, and it should be all data that you can take of your CRM. And it should be all about marketing to your candidates, marketing to your clients, but understanding that how the map crosses each other. And I was thinking, when I'm teaching, when I was teaching juniors to recruit and to build their own market map, I'd start with one candidate, because one candidate will give you a client that they're working for and a client that they used to work for. Now, they're generally got the same skill sets. So that means I've got two clients. If I now search all those clients and find the candidates that have worked at those clients, guess what? I've got all the clients that work for those clients, but I've now got where they worked for in the past. So all of a sudden, I'm developing candidates and clients that look very similar. That means that when people come to me, I've got loads of candidates and loads of clients that I can reapply those roles to and reapply the candidates to. And that's where data becomes really powerful. And that's where most people use their CRM as a storage place for candidates rather than an actual index of candidates. And I always think it's that thing. If you think about LinkedIn, LinkedIn has got most candidates on. However, there's no email address. There's very few telephone numbers on LinkedIn. So it's just a list. Okay. But if you create that data on your CRM with email addresses, telephone numbers of the right candidates, that's not a list. That is an absolute target base that you can maximize and make money from. So it is about using the skills that you've got and the technology that you've got and use it properly to build that. This was a question that I wrote this question after the client yesterday that I was talking to about talent pools. The question that she asked me was, how do you define a boundary of talent pools without making it so narrow that you have no candidates, or so broad that it's meaningless?
And for me, I would kind of look at it visibly, almost like a series of circles, where on the outside you've got those that have got some of the skills. You've got to have a list of what are the nice to haves, what are the must haves, and what if geography is important in the role, whereabouts are these people based? So the must haves, if it's a tech role, for example, I used earlier, if Python is a must have, that's on your inner circle. You've got to know where the candidates are. And you use the word index. I think index is a great way of looking at it. You know that those candidates have got to have that skill. The other ones on the outside may be more nicer to haves. And on the final side, you've got maybe hundreds of candidates who are technology people who may be able to fit into the role. So you've got to decide yourself on the list of the people that you've got, what are the list of the skills you've got, what are the nice to haves, what are the must-haves, and on the very, very outside, a whole list of things that may fit into the role. And if you can do that by role, then you've really got a good index of up-to-date candidates.
So it's an interesting conversation. If you do that by role and do that by candidate, because every client's version of Python is different. Their secondary skills will be different. Their third skills will be different. So what you might find is that what's good for one client is not good for another client. So you could actually then remodel that and then start to find out the right clients. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I think unless your systems are absolutely brilliant and you're brilliant on your systems, then mapping everything is impossible. So I think the boundaries, as I've said, is map your revenue streams, your most lucrative revenue streams. Everything else I'd leave. Okay. However, as a business, you want to be able to start to dominate your market map. So I always think about how a market map can help you really drive into a marketplace. And I remember working in the 90s and the early 2000s against certain companies who'd really heavily mapped their marketplace. And we were always hard to find candidates when we knew we were up against them because they already knew the candidates. So again, as I said earlier on, if you've got someone new coming into the business, or you're trying to break a marketplace, or you're trying to help a consultant that's not particularly performing very well, I'd map their market and I'd create a really niche market for them. And that means that they have candidates to call, they have clients to call, they have targets to hit, and you know what you're pointing at, rather than just the spray and pray approach that most people say, well, there's a marketplace, off you go, call the clients and see what happens. And so I'd have that ready for them, or if someone's failing, I'd have that built for them so we can actually then start to measure what they do. We can start to see what they're good at. So to me, it's using that KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. Use your CRM, automate stuff, AI stuff, and keep it up to date. Track it from a candidate's point of view and track it from a client development point of view. So who are you targeting? Why are you targeting? Have you got candidates that can fill those type of roles? If you've mapped all of those things, then you're in a really good position. But when you then talk about consultants, that's the thing. So if you start to think about all the clients that you've got in your client market map and you're talking to them, they should be then building a candidate map to help them build that and fill those roles. So that's the bit. How often are you talking to those candidates? How often are you engaging with those candidates? Because that's the bit that pays your bills. And we keep talking about this, that we've got our clients so high on a pedestal because they physically signed the check, but the catalyst to signing that check is the candidate. And if you haven't got the catalyst, that check will never be signed. So keep building your map. And I always say that, if you want to sound like a recruitment agency and look like a recruitment agency, then do the following. Of course, I'll find you that candidate, Mr. Client. Let me go away and search for that candidate. And then you look on the job boards, you look on LinkedIn, etc. But if you say, excuse me, Mrs. Client, absolutely, I've got 3 candidates straight away. I know straight away that I can fill those roles with. Absolutely. Let me talk to them now, or let me send them over to you now and let me have a look. That is a marked difference because you've got product rather than having an empty promise. And that is a very different conversation.
And anybody can do that. You could be new to recruitment and you can do that and stand head and shoulders above the competition, somebody who's been doing it 20 years. If you pick on the most placeable, we used to call them MPC, most placeable candidates. And particularly on the contract side, because most contract recruiters only place 5% of the candidates that we replace them. So they come to the end of the contract, in 95% of them, they go elsewhere. Whereas if you can build on the candidates you've already placed and you know what they're doing, to your point, when you're speaking to your clients, you can say, yeah, he's just finishing here or she's just finishing here. They'll be good over here. If you know the candidate well.
Yeah. I mean, I was a contract recruiter and I knew, I won't say I knew every candidate in my marketplace because I didn't, because there's always more candidates to find. But the candidates that I knew in my marketplace, I knew where they were, how long the contract was, when they were finishing, and what the likelihood was of them moving. So when they were getting to that point, I was already on top of them and moving them and putting them into positions. I was already speaking to clients of who was coming available, what was coming available. So I was already taking the market to them and the other way round rather than letting it happen. So I think it's an important point that if you know your data and you know that market very well, then it's a simple process. But we complicate it so much and then we forget it because we think it's complex to put on our systems, when actually it's pretty easy to put on our systems. We're just too lazy to actually do it, if we're really honest about that.
Well, you're racing on to the next thing.
Yes.
That's what often happens.
Hence why I take it out of the consultant's job spec and put it into someone else's job spec. So let them fill jobs, etc., etc. But if they're being populated with clients and candidates, it's their job to then keep in touch with all those clients and candidates, because that's how you manipulate the market to what you want it to be. In last week's webinar, we discussed building client market maps. And today we're talking about structuring your candidate talent pool to match your client's needs. So how do these two market maps work together in practice? And how do you maintain both when people are constantly changing jobs?
Well, on the permanent side, I think it's somewhat easier because obviously people are changing jobs, but on average, it's one every 18 months or something like that. If you're following your candidates that you've placed, it depends on the sector, of course, but it's unlikely they're changing every few months. And then there may be a question on the candidate if they are changing every few months. Are they really suitable candidates? But I think what you have to do is you have to test the boundaries of reality. Yeah, is this group of candidates good for this group of clients? And you test that because you should always be speaking to your clients and saying, I've got some more people with these skills coming up. Are you interested? And that way, having the conversation with the client as well about what you've got coming up, because you've got a database of however many thousand, but actually you know well 222 clients with these skills, for example, 222 teachers who live and can commute in an area of Derbyshire, and 2 of them are finishing and I've got them coming up in 2 months' time. Test the boundaries of how well you know your candidates, but also how well you know your clients. Because before the requirement, even if you like, comes out, you're already engaged with your client about people that are becoming available because you know your candidate pool.
So I think I've answered quite a lot of this question in the last 2 or 3 questions, but in most part, I think if you're not in regular contact with your candidates, and remember, we tend to use candidates like a throwaway commodity. You know, we only talk to them when we're in that very small process of trying to put them forward for a job or screen them for a job, rather than actually talking to them about what's going on. So we use them as a commodity rather than actually a product that we can sell, maybe not today, but at a later date. And it's how we do that. So if we've mapped the market, and that means keeping your map up to date. So either running the process quarterly or 6 months at the very least, tracking your candidates on LinkedIn, have they moved where they've moved to? But then at that point, when you think about they've already moved, it's too late because they've moved. So if we start to think about engaging candidates earlier in the process, now you said something there that's quite prevalent. You know, if the average tenure of someone is 18 months, when do they start looking for their next job?
Yeah.
They don't look at it at 18 months. They start looking at it probably a year before that. And it probably takes 12 months to make that decision to actually leave the company. So if you start to think about targeted marketing to those candidates on your database that are about to think about leaving, not leaving, because at that point it's too late because they're with every other agency, then maybe we should be reaching out to those candidates, having conversations about thinking about moving, what's the market look like, this, because that's all the information that they need. Now we start to get those candidates earlier. Now we don't have to go to the job boards. We don't have to wait for a response from an advert, because now we know who's in that exit lounge, who's entering the exit lounge, and who's exited the exit lounge. So we get people before they actually exit. The people that are queuing up at the door, we only tend to talk to them when they're right in the exit lounge towards the end of the door, the exit door. How much easier would that be that every week, if you said, right, I know 10 candidates that if I brought the right job to them, they would leave, but they're not on the job boards at the moment. That would be so much easier. And so again, as a contract consultant, that's one of the things that was drilled into me straight away. Have 10 candidates every week that you know are available and you could place instantly if a job came in. Right. How many of those can you take to the market and place anyway?
And I think there's a generational thing here as well. On the contract market, we tend not to be placing younger people because they are, they want experience. But in the permanent market, we had someone on earlier on this year who basically said the moment you place a Gen X, or the moment you place a young person, on day 2 they're looking for their next job. They're keeping their minds open just in case. And you remember we were taught back in the day about sales always be closing. Candidates, young candidates, are taught by career people always be looking. Even if you've accepted a job, you should be looking for your next one. because loyalty isn't something that is high on the agenda of a lot of people today. So if you're placing a lot of younger people, say under 30, yeah, just be aware that they're always going to have their minds open for something else that may be on the cards. And we've said before, haven't we, that people under 30 today, by the time they're 50, will have 15 different jobs and 5 different careers. That came from the head of data science at Facebook. 15 different jobs and 5 different careers. So if you're running a desk with certain skills, just be aware that there are a community of people who are always looking for something else.
So if you think about that from a headhunting point of view, one reason why headhunters are so successful is because they spend an awful lot of time nurturing their candidate base.
Yeah.
Keeping in touch with their candidate base, providing market information to their candidate base. We spend so much time marketing to our clients and giving all that information to our clients. We don't think about the candidates, but we're not talking to the candidates. So I think, if you're owning a marketplace, not only should you be talking to your clients, but speaking to all the candidates in that marketplace so we get a really good understanding of what's going on. That data, again, is really important. So let's look at that in a slightly different way. Okay. How do you use the combination then of client maps and candidate market maps to approach clients proactively with, we already own this talent marketplace conversation before they actually have a live role?
Because if I'm a client, I can tell whether you own that market by what you've put on LinkedIn, by what's on your website, by the information that you sent to me. It isn't about salary surveys. It's about what's going on in the world of work where you live. What's going on in, for example, Northamptonshire in terms of trends of employment. So I'm a logistics supplier in Northamptonshire. What else is happening in that market? If you are constantly updating your website with information, updating your clients with information, speaking to candidates, maybe interviewing candidates, finding out what's going on with them. If I'm a client and I'm looking at your company, I know that you know your market, not only because of the people that you've placed, but because of the information that you're giving me. And we are awash with data. So if you are presenting your clients with that data, that shows to me as the client, actually, they know the market really well. I'm involved as chair of a data center company, and they proactively get clients that have never spoken to them before. Yeah, phoning them up and saying, I see you've placed so-and-so at this company. Can you help me? Yeah, they don't do a lot of advertising, but the clients absolutely know that they're the masters of that area, that niche in that area, because of the candidates they've placed and the information they're giving back to the market.
So I think it's a very simple process. We've talked about mapping candidates and putting candidates with the clients and putting then candidates who would match those clients. So I think if you know your clients and you know the type of candidates, now you know who likes what and why, it should make it easy. And I always think about this from a training point of view. If I'm talking to a client, this candidate's come onto the market, but we're in discussions with them about their next move. This candidate has not only the similar skill sets to, and I'd be remembering names of their staff because I know who they are. Okay. I may have talked to them previously, etc. Excuse me. But they also have similar traits and is currently working for one of your main competitors. So you're starting to main people in the marketplace. Excuse me again. I don't know. I'm going to die here.
Don't die online because this will go viral and you'll have hundreds of views.
And I won't benefit from them.
No, you won't at all.
Yeah, you will though. So what we start to think about, so when you start to think about those traits and they are matching each other, these candidates are now exploring the marketplace. And so I've brought them to you because they look similar to this person, because they are working with one of your competitors. That common linkage of I know this person, they know that person, I know this, I know that, is very powerful to a client because it makes them think, who else do you know?
Yeah.
What else do you know? And so they're always coming to you for looking for that recommendation, who can you find, etc. Because they know that you know. Now, again, we go back to LinkedIn, and I keep saying people go onto LinkedIn for one reason. Okay, so clients and candidates do. They're looking at you not because they're looking at what you've written or what you've posted. The first thing they look at is who you're connected to. And if they're connected to the right people, then there. So if you start to talk from a market intelligent point of view and start to feed information to the clients about other clients, about their own business, about what's going on, and showing the depth of your knowledge, okay, you're using your market intelligence to create FOMO, the fear of missing out. What does this person know? How can this person bring something to me? And that is what happens when you start to have all that data and all that knowledge, that your clients will call you and go, do you know somebody? Your candidates will call you and go, I'm looking to leave. Who do you recommend? I've even had candidates calling me and saying, I'm looking to leave. I'm accepting potentially going to accept a job here. What do you know about this client? Even though they've gone through another agency, because they knew that I would know what was going on. So that intelligence starts to come, and that means that you can have that proactive conversation with clients before their roles come live. Now, we talked about this on BD. We talked about this probably another couple of months ago about, if you think about now, a candidate comes to you now, but a client doesn't want the candidate or doesn't need somebody until March, April, May next year. But think, 6 to 8 weeks recruitment process. We've got Christmas. We've then got 4 weeks notice period. We're already in mid-February by that point.
Yeah.
They want this person in March, but we're not even thinking about that because we're too busy thinking about the jobs we've got on today rather than thinking that we're clients that we can fill in 3-4 months' time. But we can do that if we've got the right candidates and push candidates towards them. But also we can help then take the candidate out of the marketplace, because that candidate become exclusive to us, because we can put them to 2, 3, 4 clients rather than one. But it's the exact client, not just spray and pray from that point of view. So your market intelligence, I use it to create that fear of missing out from the client's point of view and from the candidate's point of view, because they know that I've got lots and lots of opportunities, because when they talk to me, I can talk about the perfect clients for them based on their skills and based on their behaviors. So let's move on to that sort of conversation then. How do you qualify and grade candidates within your talent pool so you can instantly identify an A player when the client role lands?
And it comes back to that point about most placeable candidates. If you've placed a candidate before, let's assume that as successful recruiters, you've placed some really good candidates. What's the DNA of those candidates? What made that client buy that candidate? And you literally write down those skills, and then you're looking for anybody else with those skills that they're for that particular client. And to your point at the beginning, how not every candidate with the certain skills is right for every client, because it's difficult to measure culture, but particularly in permanent roles, obviously culture is very, very important to get that bit right. So what's the client's culture? What type of people are they likely to take on? And I'd have 3 lists. I'd have placed people, I'd have interviewed people, interviewed but didn't get the job. And then I'd use LinkedIn and other tools to say, missed people. Who actually got the job? My guy didn't, my lady didn't. Who actually got the job? Yeah, and what were their skills? And you just begin to, it's almost like you're weaving a tapestry together of, well, actually I got so close, but they didn't have these skills. The next time I know that they need these skills. And I would have conversations with the people who got the job that you didn't place and find out what it was. What was it that the client liked that took them on? Because we only want to deal with, to be successful recruiters, really successful recruiters in a perm market, for example. Yeah, and I know it depends on the sector. If you're placing 15 to 25 people a year, you're a really successful recruiter. Yeah, I know there are plenty of high volume ones, and sometimes in the search market, you may only have to place 5 or 6 people. But if on in a normal year, you're having 1 to 2 placements a month, you'll be doing okay depending on, see, so to place 1 or 2 people a month, how many people do you really need to know? How many people do you need to get to grips with to do that? And we've used this stat before, that most recruiters only close 19% of the business they're working on. Yeah, but if you're placing 2 a year, to a month, that's 25. Do you need to know 125? You just work out by speaking to the candidates that you know are placeable, what are the skills they've got, and write them down.
So I think again, it's that almost that $1 million question, isn't it? $1 million now sounds too much. It should be that $1 billion question, because what, as we said, what one business thinks is an A-class player, another business might not. And that's the beauty about mapping your market properly. And we're talking about mapping candidates, etc. But we should be mapping the skills within those candidates and what those skills look like, etc. But also we should be mapping behaviors. And therefore, on my client and on my candidate, again, I'd have searchable fields with, right, these are the skills, these are the behaviors. And I'd have them in a list so I can research and regurgitate those searches so I can find the candidate. Because if I've got a client that has, skill 1, 2, 3 and behaviors A, B, C, and I can instantly find the candidates that match those straight away, then that's a very simple search. But if I'm having to go away and just search for candidates that have got ABC skills, I'm now having to talk about have they got the right behaviors. So I'm now having to interview them rather than having that instantly there in front of me so I can do that. So coding your clients and coding your candidates so we can match that each other becomes the de facto search criteria. And therefore we should be able to speed up our search. So I'm now finding candidates by design, not by luck, where generally most candidates on their CVs only put their skills. It's only when you interview them and talk to them do you suddenly really have a better understanding of what their behaviors are like and what they want. Again, when you get a job spec, 90% of job specs are all skill-based. There's very little about behaviors. So again, if we probe into that behavior, now we're getting a better match constantly to our clients. So our CV to interview rate will increase, and that will mean that our placement ratios will start to increase. But to do that, it's a simple mapping process and a simple coding process on your systems that will enable you to identify the A-class team players for each individual client. And what one man's meat is another man's poison, so to speak. That's the difference.
And most CRMs now have that capability. I think a lot of leaders who are looking at CRMs go, actually, I need this, but my system doesn't have it, without checking whether the system does have it. And then they start a whole beauty parade about changing CRMs. Well, actually, 90% of what you want to do, maybe the number's high, is actually in the existing CRM. And the cost of change is enormous. So if you take on any of this advice, just check with your provider that if you think your system doesn't do that, check that it can.
Most systems, you're able to create searchable boxes in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can have different searchable boxes and then put codes into those searchable boxes that you can then start to use to search on, which brings the candidate straight back. What a lot of the new systems are doing, you're able to search notes. Now, if you can then make notes and put those things in the notes and we just search the notes, again, it brings more information and data back. So again, as you say, go back to your provider and find out what you can search and what you can't search on. Find out if you can create searchable boxes. If you can, then there. Now that's then the discipline of your business and your consultants to then fill those boxes in properly and do that properly. Now, if you're parsing CVs in and you can do the skill search straight away, then it might be able to automate that. That means talking to the candidates only means you have to put the behavioral side in. So automate some of it, use AI for some of it, etc. But that's the bit that we tend not to do because we're too ignorant of our capabilities of our CRM, and potentially we're too lazy to do that.
And the notes thing, Howard, is brilliant because we now can have either a bolt-on or part of a CRM record the conversations that we have with our candidates. The system can upload those notes into the database, and then you can search on the notes. So in terms of market intelligence, you've captured everything you've had in the conversation and it's searchable. And if your system can't do that, that's one to look at. Can I buy a piece of tech? Can I look at a piece of tech that can do that? Because that gives you a real competitive advantage.
It does. So what's the feedback loop process to ensure that every placement client conversation, market interaction improves both your candidate and client market map rather than this being lost information? And how do you put that data to work?
I think a lot of this, Ad, is tracking the data that you've got and updating it regularly. Because what we're talking about here is making sure you've got intelligent data, you're asking intelligent questions, and you're noting it down. But then it's keeping close to those candidates and tracking it and updating it. Because it goes out of date so quickly. I know we were kind of laughing a bit that contractors move around a lot, permanent people tend not to. But if everybody's looking and you assume everybody's looking, just keep updating and tracking the information and have some sort of measurement tool where you can say, how many of these most placeable candidates are you speaking to regularly? Do you know when they're about to move? Do you know something particular about that candidate? Do you know something particular about the culture of the environment in which they like to work? Because if you do know that, they're going to call you. What advice have you given that candidate and when did you give it? Is it about time you got back in contact with them again to track that and see how they're getting on? For me, it's about tracking, it's about updating, and it's almost about mapping competitive intelligence. You know more about that candidate, you know more about that client and how they can intermove together. And if you can map that, that will make you a more successful recruiter than someone that isn't doing that.
So I always think it's an interesting question. Okay. And I think using our data is really important. And I think we use our data very, very poorly. You know, at best, we might create a salary survey occasionally, at best. The good recruitment agencies will be creating that on a monthly basis. But all that information that you've got about market conditions, who's moved, why people stay, why people leave, what's happening in the market. Can you imagine going to a client with a heat map of their local marketplace and bringing up all these blue dots are all your competitor clients for that marketplace? These are, we know, these are who we talk to. All these red dots, these are all candidates with the exact skill set that you want in your marketplace that are on our database. All these brown dots are candidates with 80% of what you want. All of a sudden, that shows a massive interest in what's going on. And if we start to develop that data and that information, then all of a sudden we become the de facto, king of that marketplace. So if you want clients to come and talk to you about your marketplace, demonstrate that you know your marketplace. Demonstrate that you have that capability and that capacity. Demonstrate that you've got that knowledge. And therefore, that makes your marketing really easy. Now you start to think about, writing about the market conditions, finding out what the clients want, but finding out what candidates are talking about, and then writing about those things. You could create a newsletter that goes onto LinkedIn, it goes onto your website, but that newsletter goes to client and candidate. But now think, from that newsletter, you could create 4 or 5 LinkedIn posts that now are educating your clients and your candidates. So now you're starting to post and publish loads of data that clients and candidates want to see. And that to me is the sort of thing of that question, how you get that data off your CRM and then how you use that data to create a return on investment of putting on your CRM in the first place. And that's the bit. And Ian's just asked a question. Any suggestions for CRMs that fill the criteria how David talked about that are reasonably monthly fee for a new startup? Ian, I tell you what, rather than answer that question, it'd be, and I'm not trying to shy away from that question. I think so deciding which CRM you use is a very personal thing, because every CRM has different skills, different traits, different needs, etc., etc., etc. So you find the one that's going to fit your business, not the best salesperson selling the CRM to you. So if you want to have a conversation with us, Ian, feel free to give me a call or drop me an email at howard@jumpadvisory.com, and I'm happy to have that conversation with you. But I'd rather have more criteria from you about what you actually need, so I can actually then put recommendations forward to you. I don't just want to throw willy-nilly recommendations at you when I don't really know what it is you actually require. So it's a bit of a difficult question to answer from there. But that's the thing about market mapping your candidates, okay, and using your systems properly. And if we start to do that, then we start to see a whole difference of results and a whole different return on investment for what you're doing. So I'm going to close it off there today. Next week, obviously, we're bringing in Alex Bedison, the founder of Market Mapper, who is an expert at mapping markets from a technical point of view, and then how to leverage that data that you've got and how to use that data. So we're going to tie the last 3 webinars together, the business development we did 3 weeks ago, last week's on clients, and this week's on candidates. We're going to wrap that up from a technical point of view. So some of the questions that you're dying to ask and some things like your CRM in will be part of that conversation. But that is from a technical point of view. And I think it will be a very different conversation, because we'll be talking from the technical side about how to maintain that data, how to use that data, and how to extract and import that data, and so on and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. Dave, thanks for your input. Much appreciated as always. And we look forward to seeing you all again next week. If you haven't seen this and you want to find other people that have want to read this or view this, remember we're on LinkedIn, remember we're on YouTube, remember this will be on our website, so you can find it in all of those places. So thanks very much for your time. Look forward to seeing you all next week.
Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.